Hello, Astro subscribers, and I realized that I did not upload my video on Shatabhisha Nakshatra. And this was one of the hardest ones for me to pronounce, so if you're uh, Hindu and you know that the pronunciation that I'm using is not correct, know that I know it's not correct too. My Hindu, whatever the language is that Nakshatra is named in is not the best in the world, so apologies in advance. It's one of the ones that I have the most trouble pronouncing, so bear with me on that. So Shatabhisha Nakshatra is a nakshatra, and if you don't know what a nakshatra is, you can check out all the other videos I've done on nakshatras, but I will give a brief recap here. A nakshatra is a position in the moon's 27-day orbital period that spans 13 and 1/3 degrees of the ecliptic, which is basically the area of the sky that the planets move in from our perspective on Earth. So you can think of a nakshatra as 1 day of lunar time. So the amount of time it takes for the sun to go around once, the moon goes 13 and 1/3 degrees, and that is what the nakshatra is from an astronomical perspective. Now, astrology is basically just using correspondences of symbolic correspondences, adding them to the planets, giving the planets the representation of deities, and using those deities to predict human personality in the past, present, and the future. So you can't predict what a person is going to do, but you can predict what a planet is going to do. And if you understand that the initial conception of astrology is that as above, so below, the planets correspond, the things above us correspond to the things below happening down on Earth, and therefore you can actually get a model of what's going to happen by comparing what you know the sky is going to do to what the people are going to do when they follow that pattern. So, that being said, there are 27 nakshatras. They each last a day of lunar time, and they each have one of 9 co-rulers. So there's 9 different co-rulers for nakshatra. 9 times 3 is 27, and so there are 27 nakshatras, and the co-rulers repeat 3 times. And as everything in astrology is essentially base 12, when the co-rulers repeat is in the beginning of every fire sign, because there are 3 fire signs, starting with Aries, ending with Sagittarius, and they divide the zodiac into 3 separate parts. So, there we go. So Shatabhisha is in the sign of Aquarius. It goes from 6.4 degrees Aquarius to 20 degrees Aquarius, and is ruled by the planet Rahu. Well, technically Rahu is a mathematical point. The Vedic conception of a planet is called a graha, and it means, graha translates roughly in English to things that move across the sky that dictate your fate. So that doesn't have to be something like the sun or the moon or Mercury or Mars, these physical concrete entities. It can also be something like the ascendant, which is a mathematical point. And what Rahu represents, basically being the co-ruler of Shatabhisha Nakshatra, as well as the co-ruler of the sign of Aquarius, which Shatabhisha Nakshatra sits in, Rahu represents, I've also done a whole series on Rahu and Ketu at this point, so you can check that out if you want clarification on Rahu. But Rahu is a point on the moon's orbit that is related to our anxieties, our fears, our internal needs, our desires, and the things that we are desperate to achieve. So because we're so desperate and hungry to achieve these things, we will cut corners and behave immorally in the pursuit of wherever our Rahu is placed. Whatever sign house combination that Rahu is placed in for us is where we are hungry for achievement, and therefore will, act as a desperately hungry person would in the pursuit of those things. So if Rahu is in Scorpio, this person will effectively have a hunger for hidden information. If Rahu is in Taurus, this person will have a passion, a hunger for, a desperation for things like money, food, and music, etc. So that's what Rahu is. Now, the sign of Aquarius is ruled by the planet Saturn, which represents limitations and boundaries and social rules and obligations. It also rules work, time, effort, difficulty, patience. Saturn forces us to work for things. But the sign of Aquarius is not just ruled by Saturn. It's also ruled by two other planets in both the Western and Vedic system. In the Vedic system, Aquarius is ruled by, or co-ruled by, the planet Rahu, which I've already talked about. And in the sign of Aquarius in the Western system, you have the co-ruler of Uranus. And Uranus and Rahu are actually quite similar in terms of what they represent. The difference is the length of the orbit. So you can think of Rahu as the fear, anxiety, and obligation of Saturn with the necessity to get what it wants now. Whereas Saturn says, all right, I need this thing, I'm anxious about this thing, I'm scared I'll never achieve this thing, therefore I'm going to work 30 years to get it. Because Saturn moves in 30-year cycles. But Rahu says, I'm going to get this thing now, because if I don't get it now, I might never have it. So I'm going to cut corners, cheat, and take the fastest way possible to get this thing wherever it represents in your chart. Now, Uranus has a different approach to fear and anxiety. It's still fearful and anxious that it will not achieve what it seeks to achieve. However, it takes an 84-year plan. So it says, all right, this might take my whole life, but I'm going to spend, let's say, the first 8 years calculating my trajectory, figuring out what I want. And then the next 8 years is going to be analyzing that. And then the next 8 years is going to be acting. So it takes this long plan that takes everything into account, which is one of the reasons why Uranus people seem so big picture. Like if somebody doesn't have a lot of Aquarius or Uranus placements in their chart, and this is the same for all of the outer ring planets outside of Saturn, if somebody doesn't have a lot of these placements in their chart, they're going to be looking at these people like, why are you so big picture? Like, because they're on this long cycle. Like Uranus is actually the shortest orbit of the outer planets, and it has an 84-year cycle. So they're on an 84-year time scale to do one rotation. And if you look at Neptune, which has a 168-year cycle, people with Neptune placements, they aren't going to get their work done in their entire lifetime. And if you look at Pluto, they're not going to get their work done in like 2 lifetimes. So, because Pluto's on a 248-year cycle, and it rules things like the life and death of countries and like mass social change and like tragedy and that kind of thing. But in any event, that is the energy of Uranus. So when you put Uranus, Saturn, and Rahu together in a sign, which is the sign of Aquarius, what you get is a person who is incredibly anxious about the future and is using a combination of scientific information, which is effectively Uranus, work ethic and patience and discipline, which is Saturn, and this this devastating hunger, which grabs whatever it can when it can, which is Rahu, and then they're mixing all of these things together, which basically makes Aquarius the very intelligent but very revolutionary and anxious sign that it is. And when you go into Shatabhisha Nakshatra, which is the middle of Aquarius, like I said, 6.4 degrees to 20 degrees, and by 6.4, I actually mean 6 and 4/6, or 6 and 40 minutes out of 60 minutes. I don't mean 4 out of 10, I mean 4 out of 6. So it's really 6 and 2/3 degrees. But that being said, it's important to know that because if you're on the cusp, you can get confused and think you're in the wrong nakshatra. But when you go into Shatabhisha Nakshatra, which is co-ruled again by Rahu, you get this like double Rahu energy. And what tends to happen is these people who have this nakshatra, they tend to be very insecure, and they tend to have these exacerbated qualities um, of fear and hunger and starvation, anxiety, and they're very intelligent, but they feel like they need to get everything now. And that is basically the lore behind Rahu. Uh, they also feel like they have been screwed out of, like somebody with tremendous potential who has been screwed, basically, because the lore of Rahu in the Vedic texts is he's very similar to Lucifer actually in the Christian texts, in that he was sort of, he's a demon, but he was sort of in line to be a god, and then he got gypped by the gods. Basically, he got tricked, and they told him, no, actually, we've taken back that promise. You're no longer a god, and effectively he created a war because of that. So there's a certain amount of resentment that goes into this nakshatra too. But this nakshatra, the meaning of it, the story behind it, is one who seeks 1,000 doctors. So these people almost always have underlying mysterious illnesses that they don't quite understand what the illness is, or maybe they feel strange and they can't figure out exactly how they feel strange or why they feel strange. So they end up going to see a lot of people who are like healers. And this doesn't have to be like a doctor. It could be a psychiatrist or a psychologist. But it's also, you can see shamans from this perspective. You can see faith healers, preachers, anybody who might know what's going on with this person. And they'll seek out every single kind of answer to their problem. And this is the precursor to becoming a spiritual person. So that's the positive side of this nakshatra, because I know you're like, oh, anxiety, oh, fear, sickness, this all sounds so bad. It's like, no, you have to understand its context in the story of the nakshatras. So in order for somebody to become a spiritual person, there's a saying, I think it was Mircea Eliade, who said, a shaman is a sick person who has cured himself. And the next nakshatra after Shatabhisha is, what is it? I believe it's Purva Ashada. Actually, no. No, it's Purva Bhadrapada. Sorry, Purva Bhadrapada. And that the purpose of that nakshatra is not the person who sees 1,000 doctors. It is the person who becomes a spiritual person, and that is on the cusp of Aquarius and Pisces. So you get this person moving from the materialistic mindset into the spiritual mindset of detachment and letting go. However, if that's the next nakshatra after this one. So if that person had never been sick, had never been ill, had never been confused and anxious and hurt, then the stage would never be set for them becoming a spiritual person. So you can think of this as a darkness of consciousness that comes before the dawn of detachment and letting go of their sorrow that they've accumulated through countless lifetimes. But if a person has never been sick, they can never be cured. So this is the sickness that comes before the cure. And all of the planets that go into this nakshatra, Saturn, Rahu, Uranus, they exist to localize the cause of the sickness and then proceed to cure it and then detach themselves from the material plane entirely. And that is the function of Shatabhisha nakshatra. So yes, it is an uncomfortable nakshatra, similar to Bharani, which is in the middle of Aries. But if you've never been sick, you will never be cured. And that is the point of this nakshatra. One more warning, I suppose, about this nakshatra to know and be aware of if you have this in your chart. Especially if a malefic planet is here, you can be prone to running away from your problems, because this nakshatra is opposed to Purva Falguni, which is in the sign of Leo. And Purva Falguni is a sign of material pleasures. And if you, like intoxication and that kind of thing, like being stoned on life. So if you feel like, oh my God, this sickness is just too much to bear, I need to escape. The place, they were, like if you want to escape from a place, you need to get as far away from it as possible. So where they're going to go is the opposite archetype, which is the archetype of intoxication, of being stoned out of your mind so that you forget. And effectively, that's where this nakshatra can go, but they will not be fulfilling their duty to the world if they go there, because they've already been there. And they're on the other side, which is effectively healing addiction, healing sickness, healing pain, and then ultimately becoming a spiritual person and becoming detached from the material plane itself. And that is the function of this nakshatra. And that was my analysis of Shatabhisha nakshatra. And yeah, continue to watch this channel for more information on astrology and other such topics. See you next time.